What was supposed to be just another powerful day on the set of The Chosen suddenly turned into a chilling moment that no one expected. Cameras were rolling, the actors were in position, and the crew was moving quickly to keep the production on schedule when, out of nowhere, something happened that made hearts skip a beat. The man at the center of it all, Dallas Jenkins, the creator and director of the hit series, found himself in the middle of a terrifying accident that left everyone frozen in shock. This was not a scripted scene. This was real life. And for a few moments, the entire future of the project hung in uncertainty. The set of The Chosen is not like any ordinary workplace. It is a place filled with energy, creativity, and constant movement. On any given day, dozens of people are busy working behind the cameras while the actors prepare to bring powerful biblical scenes to life. The pressure is always there. Every camera angle must be perfect. Every beam of light must shine just right. And every detail must serve the bigger purpose of the story. For Dallas Jenkins, the responsibility is heavy. He is not just directing another show. He is carrying the weight of a vision that millions of people across the world have connected to. On this particular day, the production was deep into shooting an important sequence. The atmosphere was alive with excitement but also tense with urgency. Long hours had already been spent designing the set, preparing the equipment, and making sure that everything would come together seamlessly. But filmmaking is never truly seamless. Behind the beauty of the final product, there are constant challenges. Heavy lights are hanging high above the actors. Cameras are positioned on moving rigs. Electrical cables snake across the ground like veins of the production. Every piece of equipment is necessary, but every piece of equipment can also be dangerous if something goes wrong. Dallas moved across the set, checking details, speaking with the crew, and adjusting the vision in real time. He had done this countless times before. He was focused, determined, and committed to pulling out the best performance from his team. Yet in the midst of this high-energy environment, something completely unexpected was about to happen. It began with a sound, a sudden creak, a shift in the atmosphere that immediately caught the attention of those nearby. Some thought it was just another piece of equipment being adjusted. Others ignored it altogether, assuming it was part of the usual chaos of a film set. But within seconds, that sound turned into a moment of real danger. What no one could have predicted was that a piece of the set had not been secured properly. In the rush of production, even the smallest oversight can grow into a major hazard. The weight of the structure pressed against its weak point, and then, in one quick motion, it gave way. Dallas, standing close by, was suddenly in the wrong place at the wrong time. The crash echoed through the set, and everything came to a halt. The accident was no longer just a possibility. It had happened. The moment it happened, time seemed to slow down. 1 second, the crew was focused on their work. The next, they were watching in horror as part of the set gave way. A heavy piece of equipment, metal and wood combined, started to fall. It was the kind of sound that makes your heart race, the kind of noise that makes people turn their heads before they even know what they are looking at. Dallas Jenkins was right there in its path, unaware of what was about to happen. The crew gasped. Some shouted his name, but the warning came too late. The equipment came crashing down with a force that shook the ground beneath their feet. The loud clang echoed through the entire space, bouncing off walls and making the room feel like it was collapsing. For a moment, no one knew how badly Dallas had been hit. Dust filled the air, scattering under the harsh lights, and all eyes were searching desperately to see where he was. Some crew members froze in place, unable to process what had just happened, while others rushed forward without a second thought, hoping they could help. Dallas was on the ground. The impact had thrown him off balance, and his body hit the floor hard. The set that had toppled over had missed crushing him completely by only a few inches. But part of it had struck his. You said, the silence that followed was louder than the crash itself. It was the kind of silence that comes when fear takes over a room, when no one dares to move or speak, because the weight of what just happened presses down on every soul present. The cameras stopped rolling. The actors stood frozen in their places, and every sound on the set seemed to vanish into thin air. For a moment, The Chosen was not a production anymore. It was a room filled with people staring at the man who had built the vision they were all working to bring to life. now lying on the ground after a terrifying accident. Some crew members dropped their equipment and sprinted toward him, their footsteps echoing in the stillness. Others stayed rooted in place, too afraid of what they might see if they got closer. The actors, who only minutes earlier had been preparing to step into their characters, stood out of costume, out of script, their real emotions written across their faces. This was not the story they had come to tell. This was not the drama of the Bible brought to life. This was real danger, real pain, real uncertainty. Dallas tried to push himself up, but the sharp pain in his shoulders stopped him. His face showed the shock he felt, not just from the accident itself, but from the sudden shift in reality. One moment he was directing a scene, giving instructions with confidence. The next, he was the center of an emergency. People knelt beside him, their voices low, asking if he could move, if he could breathe, if he could speak. His body was hurting, but his voice was steady enough to answer. That alone gave the crew a small wave of relief, but it did not erase the fear. The set that only moments earlier had been alive with energy and creativity was now a place of anxiety. Every person was thinking the same thing, though no one said it out loud. What if he had been standing just a few inches closer to where the heavy equipment landed? What if the crash had struck his head instead of his side? The thought was too chilling to voice, but the image lingered in everyone's mind. Dallas looked around at the people who had rushed to his side. He could see the fear in their eyes, the guilt on some faces, the overwhelming mix of emotions that weighed heavily on the room. Even through the pain, his first instinct was to calm them down. He told them he was all right, that it looked worse than it was, that they needed to breathe. It was his way of shifting the focus back to them. But the truth was clear to everyone. It could have been much worse. The production that had been built on faith, hope, and storytelling had come face to face with how fragile life really is. The stillness did not last long. Once the shock wore off, the set turned into a storm of motion. Crew members rushed in from every corner, their voices colliding in the air as they called for first aid, for water, for space to breathe. The cameras were pushed aside, the lights dimmed, and the sound of hurried footsteps replaced the usual hum of production. It no longer felt like a film set. It felt like an emergency room built out of cables, props, and stage lights. Two members of the crew, trained in basic safety procedures, knelt by Dallas and checked him carefully. They spoke calmly but firmly, asking him where it hurt, asking him to stay still even as he tried to rise. He hated being the focus of so much attention, but he could see in their faces that they needed him to listen. The weight of responsibility that usually sat on his shoulders had shifted onto theirs, and now they were the ones directing the scene. Only this time it was not a script. It was real life. Someone ran for the medical kit. Another cleared away the broken pieces of the set so no one else would get hurt. A production assistant pulled out a phone to call for professional medical help. Her voice steady even though her hands shook. The entire crew seemed to move as one body, every person playing a part to protect the man who had always been their guide. The actors, too, stepped out of character and into reality, offering jackets to keep him warm, holding back the crowd so the team around Dallas could work. Dallas, though clearly in pain, tried to lighten the moment with a half-smile. He told them not to panic, that he would be fine, but the look in his eyes betrayed the words. He knew it had been close, too close. The memory of the falling equipment was already etched into his mind, and he could feel the ache spreading across his body as the adrenaline began to fade. What stood out most was the unity on that set. People who had been strangers only weeks earlier, brought together for a common purpose, now felt like family. They moved not just out of duty, but out of genuine care. The story of The Chosen had always been about faith, sacrifice, and connection, and in that frightening moment, those same themes played out behind the scenes. Minutes stretched longer than they should have as they waited for help to arrive. Every second felt heavy, every breath felt louder, and yet in the middle of the chaos, there was a sense of gratitude already forming. Gratitude that he was conscious, that he was speaking, that the accident had not been worse than it was. Still, no one could deny what had just happened. They had seen with their own eyes how quickly everything could change. When the dust had settled and the immediate danger had passed, Dallas finally had a moment to take it all in. The chaos of the set, the worried voices of his team, the sting of pain in his body. All of it replayed in his mind like a scene he wished he could cut from the script. Yet unlike a script, there was no rewriting this moment. It was carved into reality. He lay back against a chair, his shoulders sore, his ribs aching, and for the first time that day, he allowed himself to feel the full weight of what had almost happened. The thought struck him hard. What if he had been standing just a step to the left? What if the falling structure had landed differently? What if, in those few seconds, everything had ended? It was not just about him. It was about the story he was telling, the people depending on him, and the millions waiting for the next chapter of The Chosen. The accident reminded him of something he often spoke about, but rarely had to confront so personally. The fragile line between life and death, between continuing the mission and leaving it unfinished. Dallas was not a man to dwell on fear, but he could not ignore the reality. Pain has a way of sharpening perspective. As he sat quietly, he noticed the faces around him. The cast members, still in parts of their costumes, hovering nearby with concern. The crew, some holding back tears, others visibly angry at themselves for letting such a thing happen. He realized in that moment how deeply these people cared. They were not just employees, not just actors, not just names on a call sheet. They were family, and they had looked at him not as a director, but as a brother, a friend, a leader worth protecting. The accident humbled him. He had always believed that The Chosen was more than just a show. It was a mission, a calling. Yet seeing how quickly it could have all been taken away forced him to admit something he rarely did. He was human, vulnerable, breakable. No matter how big the vision, no matter how passionate the work, no one is beyond the reach of life's unpredictable turns. Instead of anger, Dallas felt gratitude rising in his heart. Gratitude that he was still breathing. Gratitude that he could still speak, still move, still dream. Gratitude for a crew that had rushed to his aid without hesitation. Gratitude that the accident had not silenced the story he was still meant to tell. He closed his eyes for a moment, whispered a prayer under his breath, and decided then and there that this moment would not define him by fear, but by resilience. The hours after the accident were heavy, but they also gave Dallas clarity. He knew the risks of filmmaking would never fully disappear. But he also knew something even stronger. As long as he had breath, as long as he could stand, he would keep pushing forward. Not just for himself, but for every person who had believed in The Chosen. The accident had shaken him, yes, but it had also reminded him of why he began this journey in the first place. Word of the accident traveled across the set faster than any camera could capture. Those who had not seen it happen heard the crash and rushed to find out what had gone wrong. When they saw Dallas sitting there, shaken but alive, the relief came first, followed quickly by the deep ache of worry. This was not just a director they admired. This was a man many of them had come to love like family. The thought of losing him, even for a moment, had pulled at something deeper than professional respect. It had stirred the raw fear of losing someone who mattered. The cast members, who had spent so many hours stepping into biblical roles, found themselves struggling to separate the script from reality. They were used to acting out scenes of miracles, healings, and divine protection. But now they were facing a moment that demanded their real selves. Some stood quietly, holding back tears. Others spoke softly to one another, replaying the moment and confessing how close it felt to tragedy. A few of them went straight to Dallas, resting a hand on his shoulder or kneeling beside him. Not as performers, but as friends who could not hide their fear. Crew members, hardened by the grind of long production days, revealed a softer side in that moment. They blamed themselves, even though Dallas told them not to. The stagehands who had built the set, the technicians who had checked the equipment, the assistants who had kept the schedule. They all carried a sense of guilt that weighed heavier than the fallen structure itself. Their eyes told the story of people who wished they could rewind time, fix the smallest mistake, and erase the accident from existence. But reality does not allow rewinds. All they could do was gather close and stand with him in the aftermath. The unity that formed in those hours was undeniable. People who had been separated by roles, actors in one circle, crew in another, suddenly broke those invisible walls. They ate together in silence during the break that followed, some holding hands in prayer, others simply sitting side by side in quiet solidarity. They no longer saw themselves as parts of a machine working toward a television series. They saw themselves as a community bound together by something fragile and precious. The awareness of how quickly everything can change. For Dallas, this unity was both comforting and humbling. He had always believed the show's power came from the story of Christ being told. But now he could see another story playing out off-camera. A story of compassion, loyalty, and shared humanity. The accident had shaken them all, but it had also revealed the depth of their connection. In a strange way, it became a moment of truth. Not scripted truth, not staged emotion, but the raw truth of people choosing to stand together when it mattered most. When word of the accident reached the outside world, the reaction was immediate. Fans of The Chosen flooded social media with messages of prayer, love, and encouragement for Dallas. Some shared personal stories of how the series had touched their lives, connecting his near miss with their own experiences of hardship and survival. Others simply wrote 3 words: "We're with you." The support was overwhelming, a reminder that the project was never just about cameras and scripts. It was about people, millions of them all over the world, who had found hope in the story Dallas was telling. Dallas read some of those messages in the days that followed, each one stirring something inside him. He realized that his accident, frightening as it had been, had also given the audience a glimpse of the reality behind the scenes. They saw not only the polished episodes on their screens, but the human cost, the effort, and the risks that went into making them. And in that awareness, their connection to the series deepened. The Chosen was no longer just a story about faith. It had become a living testimony to it. In his quieter moments, Dallas reflected on the fragility of it all. He thought about how quickly life can shift, how a single moment can rewrite the path ahead. But instead of fear, he felt determination. The accident had not stopped him. It had sharpened him. It reminded him that his calling was bigger than any setback, bigger than any danger. He chose to see the near tragedy not as an ending, but as a sign to keep moving forward with even greater resolve. When he finally returned to the set, still sore but walking with purpose, the atmosphere changed. There was an unspoken bond between everyone who had been there that day. They greeted him not with applause, but with quiet smiles and nods of respect. They knew he could have walked away, taken time off, or even decided to end the project altogether. But instead, he showed up, and in doing so, he reminded them why they were there in the first place. To create something that mattered, something that would outlive all of them. Dallas later shared his thoughts publicly, choosing honesty over drama. He admitted the accident had been scary, admitted it had left him shaken, but he also spoke of gratitude. Gratitude for the crew who had acted quickly, for the fans who had sent love, and for the chance to keep telling the story. His words were simple, but they carried weight. "Every day is a gift," he said, "and as long as we have breath, we keep going." The accident became part of The Chosen's journey, not as a stain on its history, but as proof of its heart. It was a reminder that behind the lights and cameras were people who risked, who cared, who believed. And at the center of it all was Dallas Jenkins, a man who faced the shock of a near tragedy and chose faith over fear, resilience over retreat. The show went on, not just because it had to, but because it was meant to. And in that decision, the message of The Chosen lived not only on the screen, but in the lives of everyone who witnessed the story behind the story.